One, one, two. Okay, that should be good. So whenever you're ready, is it okay if I just snip this on you, maybe?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Is it a clip?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That should be good.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you
Great.
so much. So whenever you're ready, feel free to start.
You want me to just kick off?
We should wait perhaps 5 more minutes for people.
Yes, it's not
fine.
quite
5, 10
time
more
yet,
minutes.
is
It's
it?
all,
Yeah, okay.
I'm over
Fine,
before
just
10.
give me a shout
Yeah,
when.
yeah, yeah. No, no,
Yep.
no, no.
Right, then I think we'll make a start. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for being here this evening. It is a great pleasure to be joining you here tonight. My name's Reeve and I'm a research fellow at the Institute of Classical Studies at the University of London. My research focuses on collections of Cypriot antiquities in UK museums and the big questions of how and why they were excavated and exported. I was told to start. I'm sorry, I was told to start.
I was coming to introduce you.
Well, let's do that. Let's do that.
It's my bad. It's my bad.
Let's start again. Why not?
Sorry. Some more people should be turning up. We usually give it 10 minutes
Okay.
to everybody.
Right.
Anyway.
Well,
Okay, there we go. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to start again. Reeve is a material culture historian whose research interests focus on the excavation and collection of Cypriot antiquities and their reception in the UK, especially in museums. Her doctoral thesis explored the ancient Cypriot collection at Leeds Museums and Galleries and its histories of excavation, collection, and display. From September 2021, she has been an associate lecturer in classics at the Open University, and from May 2025, a research fellow at the Institute of Classical Studies at the University of London. She is also co-chair of the Classical Collections Network, which supports the study and use of classical collections in UK museums, and a member of the Classical Association and the Society for the Promotion of Hellenic Studies. Recently, Reeve co-edited with Dr. Thomas Kiely and Dr. Lindy Crewe, Empire and Excavation, Critical Perspectives on Archaeology in British-period Cyprus, 1878 to 1860, which was published by Sidestone Press in 2025. In 2024, she published in the Journal of Victorian Culture Perceptions of Cyprus and the Production of Ceramics from 1909 to 1920. Her list of publications, conferences and workshops is endless, but I will not take up time reading through them. Instead, let me please call to the podium Reeve to deliver the lecture. Thank you.
thank you very much for that kind introduction. Come through. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. It's a privilege to be with you here tonight, and it will be even better the second time. So, my research focuses on collections of Cypriot antiquities in UK museums and how and why they were excavated and exported from Cyprus, mainly in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. I'm interested in the reasons behind these object journeys and the diverse people whose lives intersected with them and moved them in new directions. It's not all about aristocratic collecting or museums directly seeking objects for their own collections. It's a more complicated picture than that. I feel strongly that museums today have a duty to understand what they have in their collections and the histories behind these objects, and I hope that my research can shed some light on this. I'm also interested on object lives within the museum, how they've been interpreted and displayed, and how this has changed over time, and it's really this topic which sparked the research that I'm going to talk about today. I became aware that some Victorian museum collections of Cypriot antiquities were made in order to provide design inspiration for manufacturers and their workers, offering examples of beautiful and unfamiliar forms and decoration which could be drawn on in developing new wares. This led me to the wider question of how more general ideas of Cyprus, as well as Cypriot antiquities, might have been expressed in British ceramic productions of the 19th and early 20th centuries, and what this might tell us about Cyprus in the British imagination, both before and after the watershed of the British administration in 1878. Today, I'll be talking about some of the ways in which manufacturers of transferware mass-produced tableware for a general market and art pottery drew on concepts of Cyprus in shaping and marketing their wares. I'll focus in particular on objects represented in the Centre for Visual Arts Research's magnificent collections, many of which you can see on display in this building. The first pattern I'd like to discuss, Spode's Caramanian pattern, began to be produced around 1809. It was mainly used for tableware on all the items needed for a very elaborate dinner service, from platters and serving bowls through to ladles and pickle dishes and even a basket for chestnuts, so very much aimed at the upper end of the domestic market. The designs were etched onto copper plates to be printed onto the vessels, and different elements of the designs could be combined and adapted for different shapes. As was common at the time, Spode's designers drew on a published book of drawings for the elements of the design. The book in question was published in 1803 and titled Views in the Ottoman Empire, chiefly in Caramania, a part of Asia Minor hitherto unexplored, with some curious selections from the islands of Rhodes and Cyprus and the celebrated cities of Corinth, Carthage and Tripoli. The drawings were made by the Italian artist Luigi Meier, who was employed by the diplomat Sir Robert Ainslie, British ambassador at Constantinople from 1776 to 1794. Ainslie does not appear to have gone to Cyprus himself, but sent Meier with a party of English travellers in 1792 and no doubt instructed him to make drawings of what he saw there. Meier's volume included 2 scenes which are said to be set in Cyprus. Sorry, am I not quite loud enough? Is that any better? Better? Good.
Remember to talk.
Will do. So, Meier's volume included 2 scenes which are said to be set in Cyprus, although there is some doubt over this. The first is titled Antique Fragments at Limisso, and as we can see, it represents a courtyard scene with pillars of different architectural orders, which is not easily identifiable as any specific real-life location. Indeed, Dr. Severis has suggested that it's not a scene in Cyprus at all. The text which accompanies this image draws a distinction between the artistry of earlier times, which produced the pillar fragments we see here, and the way in which they've been reused by contemporary builders. It states, "We find fragments of columns finely wrought by the skillful artists of former times, jumbled together. Surely in places where sculptured fragments lay scattered with so much profusion, something more approaching to symmetry might have been obtained were not the ignorance and indolence of the builder extreme." Even in the early 19th century, the cliché of the decline in artistic standards and craftsmanship since ancient times was well worn and familiar. And it's notable that this is how Cyprus is being presented to the readers of Meier's volume, produced under Robert Ainslie's patronage. The second image has the title A Colossal Vase near Limisso in Cyprus and is easier to identify. It represents the huge limestone vessel situated on the Acropolis in the sanctuary of Aphrodite at Amathus, dating from the 7th to 5th century BCE. In 1865, a party of French archaeological explorers appropriated the vase and took it to the Louvre Museum in Paris, where it remains. The text accompanying the illustration states that local people were accustomed to use the carved bull below the handle as a target for shooting practice, and we can see in the image people with guns for this purpose. So the images we find represented here draw attention both to the ancient past of Cyprus and its material traces in the 19th century present, and to a trope of the gap between past glories and present decline. When the firm of Spode drew on Mayer's engravings for its Caramania pattern, it didn't simply reproduce these images, but adapted them in ways which changed their meanings and interpretation. The choice of Caramania for the pattern name in the first place suggests a diffuse blending of different lands and locations along the southern coast of Asia Minor, creating a general impression of the exotic, unfamiliar, and far away for British audiences. This is intensified by the adaptations made by Spode's engravers, which add an unreal, dreamlike quality to the images. For example, the antique fragments image is adapted for different shaped vessels by adding and taking away architectural elements such as walls and arches, creating images which make little architectural sense. Walls are left incomplete and arches are removed to leave freestanding columns without a purpose. The addition of a bench in the foreground with outsized specimens of fruit and flowers also distorts the perspective and places the viewer in an uncertain relation to the scene. The reproduction of the colossal vase image is fairly faithful to the original engraving, with the different elements of the vase, the people with the guns using it for target practice, and the little dog in the foreground. It becomes more ambiguous when it's combined with other scenes on the surface of a vessel. As is common in transferware, the border around a central image is not necessarily related to it, and here Spode have reused the border from their Indian sporting pattern with hunters and exotic wildlife. However, elements of this border have at times migrated into the main pattern, so we now have an elephant alongside the colossal vase, and the person holding a gun next to it might be part of this shooting party, which was very much not part of Luigi Mayer's experience of Cyprus. As we see here, multiple designs could be combined into a single scene, making a composite, merged landscape which does not closely correspond to any objective reality. The responses of consumers to the Caramanian pattern were no doubt varied, based on the level of knowledge and cultural experience that they brought to it. While this pattern brought some images of Cyprus into upper middle class households, it would have to be a very well-read and well-informed viewer who would be able to disentangle the different elements of each scene and relate them to specific locations. It's perhaps more likely that consumers valued the general impression of the unfamiliar and far away and associated themselves with this pattern to make a statement about their interests in geography and travel. This might have been particularly important for women as consumers, for whom opportunities to travel were generally very limited, but who might have had more ability to influence the tableware choices made for their homes. A little later, in the 1840s, the firm of Davenport introduced a pattern named Cyprus. This consisted of a wide variety of ceramic wares, including a footbath, as we can see on the bottom right here, but mainly dinner services, and especially elaborate services for afternoon tea. Unlike Spode's Caramanian, images were not combined and adapted to closely fit the space available on each piece, but were simply resized, cropped, and repeated as necessary. We're definitely a little bit down market here. The technique is again transferware, so a copper plate would be engraved with the image and then reused many times, making the ware more widely affordable. As we can see, what we have here is a generic exotic image incorporating palm trees, water and a pagoda-shaped building with very little relation to Cyprus or indeed to any specific location. Unlike the Caramanian, it's not based on eyewitness testimony. In fact, the name Cyprus has simply been applied to a fairly generic pattern, perhaps to evoke an impression of far-off lands at the edge of British people's knowledge of the world. It perhaps suggests a longing among British consumers for distant lands and cultures, an experience limited to very few people in this period, mainly of the upper classes. Tableware offered a way of indulging this taste and also laying claim to knowledge and culture, even if this wasn't necessarily grounded in reality. One notable effect of the British assumption of the administration of Cyprus in 1878 was that Cyprus suddenly became a very popular topic in British public discourse. Although the idea that British people were previously largely unaware of Cyprus has been overstated, it's doubtless the case that Cyprus rapidly became a topic of much discussion at all levels of society, and there was a general scramble for information. The way this played out in the commercial sector is an interesting subject which demands further exploration, and recent work by Marinos Porgeris on Cyprus in British newspapers makes an important contribution in this area. These are just a few advertisements that I've dug out of newspapers from 1878, all of which happen to relate to clothing. As we can see, Cyprus is being used to advertise different products and stores, one of which has gone to the lengths of naming its new premises Cyprus House, so it can use the word Cyprus 10 times in a single advert. The clothing store of Lewis's in Birmingham was even offering a free gift of a map of Cyprus to encourage people to come and purchase their products. Manufacturers of transferware were not far behind in adopting the name Cyprus to market their wares, whether or not their images and designs were meant to evoke Cyprus itself. The proliferation of Cyprus designs around this time can be traced in the design registers of the British National Archives at Crewe, which include details of, and sometimes samples of designs which were registered to prevent them being copied. And you can see the scale of the design register there with my laptop for scale. This is just part of 1 year. The firm of F.J. Emery used Cyprus for a range of transferware with evocative, romantic scenes, some of which are not inappropriate for Cyprus, but are difficult to tie closely to a specific place or time. This image is one where the source engraving has in fact been identified. It shows a waterfront scene, which is based on a painting of Venice, in fact, later engraved and published in the Art Journal in 1849, which is presumably where Emery's artists found it. More abstractly, the firm of Powell, Bishop and Stonier registered a Cyprus design of geometric flowers and foliage. The CVAR collections include an imported plate in this pattern, and a further interesting question, which I haven't really explored yet, is whether the market for these wares extended to Cyprus itself. Cyprus was also used for what were termed useful wares, pitchers and basins for washing, including this magnificent gilded design. The firm of Brownfield and later Dalton adopted the name Cyprus for kaleidoscopic patterns of flowers in a range of colourways, very much in keeping with contemporary aesthetic movement design, and you can see examples of these too in the CVAR collections. These are just a few of the very many patterns labelled Cyprus about this time. Evidently, it was very much at the forefront of public discourse, and therefore a name which could be relied upon to catch the attention of the consumer. Also appearing around this time was an attractive dinner service in blue and white transferware with gilt edging, produced by the firm of Joseph Robinson of Burslem in Staffordshire. The imagery is of birds and butterflies in a wetland setting, sometimes with some rather indistinct buildings sketched in the distance. Ornithologists can have fun attempting to identify the birds from their depiction and deciding whether they could conceivably have been seen in Cyprus. So we have storks, what might be a bustard, what's definitely a hoopoe, a bee-eater, I think, and a secretary bird which has caught a snake, which, as I understand it, would be found in Africa and probably not in Cyprus, but who knows? In any case, some of you may recognise this pattern as the Centre for Visual Arts Research owns a dinner service featuring it, obtained from a descendant of the Wolseley family and said to be the dinner service used in Cyprus by the first British High Commissioner, Sir Garnet Wolseley. This therefore locates these objects in a very specific time and place, which is worth unpacking to consider what they can tell us. We know quite a lot about the Wolseleys' first months in Cyprus due to Garnet Wolseley's journals, edited by Anne Cavendish, and his wife Louisa Wolseley's letters to him, which are preserved in the Brighton and Hove archives in the UK. The somewhat preposterous setting of Government House is also well known, shipped in pieces from Britain at enormous expense, impossible to heat in winter and impractical in summer as well. In this large and drafty building, Louisa Wolseley attempted to produce effects with her interior decorating and to make a statement about the Wolseleys' social status and good taste. We know how very important these matters were to the Wolseleys from Garnet's diary, in which he relentlessly pours scorn on British visitors who do not live up to his standards. While Louisa Wolseley was waiting to be allowed to join her husband in Cyprus, she occupied herself with procuring household furnishings. These had to be bought on a budget. The Wolseleys were not particularly wealthy by the standards of their class, and Louisa's letters are filled with discussion of the prices of domestic items. She was a great fan of the contemporary arts and crafts style, which was promoted by William Morris and his associates, which paradoxically championed simple, handmade furnishings made by skilled artisans, inspired by socialist principles, but which were therefore extremely costly and available only to the rich. Louisa spent 5 happy hours at Morris & Company's shop in London, choosing wallpapers and fabric for chairs and sofas. She also stocked up on less expensive fabric while in France, writing that, though pretty, it's scarcely Morris, clearly demonstrating where her aesthetic allegiances lay. Although this image here of Government House is much later, around the 1930s, I wonder whether what we're seeing are the traces of the Wolseley's choices and the Morris cretonne on the chairs. We also know that Louisa bought tableware from the firm of Thomas Good and Company on South Audley Street in London, though unfortunately their archives don't stretch back far enough to confirm whether this was the Joseph Robinson service. It would, in any case, fit well with the Wolseleys' search for relatively inexpensive household goods, which nonetheless proclaimed their impeccable good taste. The simple blue and white design is not ostentatious, while the range of dishes and plates still cater for elaborate dinners with multiple courses. It's very tempting to think that the name of the Cyprus pattern is what attracted Louisa Wolseley's attention, but of course this can only be speculation. As we can see, the prolific use of Cyprus to advertise ceramic wares around this period was largely a marketing device and not really reflective of any particular engagement with Cyprus and its visual culture. There are, however, exceptions in ceramics produced as a result of exposure to ancient Cypriot pottery in Britain, which draw on and reflect its forms and decoration. Cypriot antiquities began to appear in greater quantities in UK museums and on the auction market around the middle of the 19th century, both at the South Kensington Museum in London and in museums and galleries around the country. One important perceived role for these antiquities was to inspire manufacturers and artisans in creating new designs. In Cyprus, Herbert Kitchener and George Hake excavated specifically for the collections of the South Kensington Museum, while the British Museum augmented its own collections both through sponsoring excavations and purchases. A little later, the Decorative Arts Guild in London, which offered its services for tasteful design and furnishings, was displaying ancient Cypriot pottery alongside modern imports. Cypriot antiquities also caught the eye of Colin Minton Campbell of the Minton firm, famous for its fine ceramics. At the opening of the Stoke-on-Trent Free Library and Museum in 1878, an initiative specifically designed to benefit the working classes, Minton said he hoped that in connection with that institution there would be science classes where the commonest potter might see what had been done by potters in bygone days. He had some common clayware supposed to have been found at Cyprus before the birth of our Saviour. Some specimens showed that their forefathers were not deficient in their ideas of form. Backing up these words, Minton took steps to distribute Cypriot antiquities to the museums of manufacturing towns, including Stoke, Hanley, Burslem and Stafford in the region known as the Potteries due to its importance for ceramic production, and also to Nottingham, Birmingham and Liverpool, as shown by the red markers on the map. The South Kensington Museum also added Cypriot antiquities from the Hake-Kitchener excavations, including ceramics and glass, to its touring collections, which were sent round local museums on a temporary basis to provide examples of unfamiliar forms and designs with the aim of stimulating new ideas and innovative productions, and these are the blue markers on the map. The arrival of the latest loan from South Kensington tended to be reported in enthusiastic terms in local newspapers, which means I've been able to track the ancient Cypriot loan collection over a 60-year period to King's Lynn, Weymouth, Hastings, Leicester, Bath, Warrington, Burslem, Nottingham, Dundee, Preston and Sunderland, and no doubt there are many more. These industrially focused collections therefore played a role in bringing Cypriot antiquities to people around the country. Artistic influence is not always easy to trace, and who knows what inspirations may have been sparked by these ancient Cypriot collections, or what interests or enthusiasms they may have helped to develop in the people who saw them. We can, however, detect some of the impact of Cypriot antiquities on ceramic designs, starting with the firm of Dalton Lambeth. This was founded by Henry Dalton in the 1860s in London in partnership with the nearby Lambeth School of Art, and it mainly made art pottery for a middle-class market with a constantly updated repertoire of designs. One striking aspect of Dalton Lambeth was that a large proportion of the artists were women who had a great deal of freedom to follow their own interests and develop their artistic skills as they thought best. Dalton famously said that to distinguish between eccentricity and genius may be difficult, but it is surely better to bear with singularity than to crush originality. The artists were therefore free to try new things, to take risks, and to draw inspiration as widely as they wanted. In 1879, Dalton Lambeth, like so many other manufacturers, produced a small range of Cyprus ware. It's easy to identify as it's marked with Cyprus on the base, and it seems to have been limited to just a small handful of different shaped vases. However, unlike the transferware manufacturers who use the term Cyprus as a lure for consumers without much reason behind it, the Dalton Lambeth artist productions indicate close engagement with the objects on display in London's museums, where they must have been frequent visitors. Looking at this Cypro-archaic bichrome amphora from the British Museum and the Dalton Lambeth piece next to it, we can see several points of connection and also several areas in which the artist has let her imagination run riot. The form is very similar, with an ovoid body, wide neck and twin horizontal handles, though the ribbed effect on the neck of Dalton's vase is an innovation. The decorative pattern around the body of the vase of buds and lotus flowers is clearly a nod to the Cypriot vessel's decoration, and they both have hatched triangles on the neck, though the scale pattern at the top of the Dalton vase is maybe more Mycenaean in inspiration. There are in fact two of these orange and black Dalton amphorae in existence. I expect they were probably made in pairs, which is why I've included both images. Another Dalton vase in the Cyprus range has exactly the same form, but here the decoration is of blue intertwined flowers on a green background without anything very Cypriot about it. We get a similar disconnect between form and decoration in this vase on the left, which has, and I've lost myself. Yes, here we are, the vase with the Mycenaean shape, which has a narrow foot and three small loop handles around the shoulder, but the decoration is painted lush flowers in cream, green and brown. Similarly, this jug has a fairly typically Cypriot globular body, pinched rim and high loop handle, and to me there's something evocative of Cypro-archaic decoration in these overlapping geometric circles, but the slightly muddy colours of green, blue and brown are typical of the Dalton Lambeth output more generally. Another vase has an exuberant blend of colours and designs on a form that perhaps owes something to the familiar plainware bottle, but is adorned with flowers, lotus, leaves, a running meander, hatch triangles, and even more decorative elements. What's so fascinating to me about these vessels is that they seem to be a conversation between modern and ancient artists, each experimenting with form and decoration and reaching different conclusions. Fortunately, because Dalton artists always signed their work, we can put names to the modern, if not the ancient artists, even if we don't know much more about them. These were decorated by Florence Barlow, Emily Stormer, Mary Butterton, Margaret Chalice, and Euphemia Thatcher. It's good to be able to recognise the work of women artists and to give them credit for their place in the reception of Cypriot antiquities in the UK. These Cypriot antiquities placed in local museums around Britain also inspired another kind of ceramic ware of a very different sort. Around 1880, the Staffordshire firm of W.H. Goss introduced a new type of souvenir ornament, which rapidly grew to huge popularity. These took the form of miniature ornaments made in plain ivory ware and hand-painted with the heraldic crest of the place from which they were bought. And if a location didn't have a heraldic crest, then Goss invented one for them. The objects chosen by Goss for reproduction were usually of historic interest, and the replicas imitated the shape, but not the colour or the decoration, being made of plainware and adorned with a crest. So as we can see here, the Goss model of the Roman Colchester vase copies its form reasonably accurately, but not the moulded decoration or the colour. There was not necessarily any relation between the origin of the object reproduced and the place it was sold, so you find copies of the Colchester vase with crests from a wide variety of places. This kind of inexpensive, miniaturized pottery was enormously popular for a variety of reasons. The development of the railway network in Britain made it possible for people of all classes to visit new places on holiday, especially seaside resorts, and there was a natural inclination to buy a small souvenir of these visits, either for oneself or as a gift for family and friends. The range of shapes and crests available also appealed strongly to the universal instinct for collecting. Having gathered 2 or 3 pieces, there was a temptation to keep adding to the collection. It was recommended to middle-class mothers for their daughters as a dainty hobby and one which may be used to teach little women such housewifely arts as the care of fine china, according to a popular book of household advice of the time. Purpose-built display cabinets were popular to display collections in the home, as we can see here. The trend lasted until around 1930 and then declined, leaving behind huge numbers of these ornaments, which now wash through second-hand shops and online marketplaces. However, in the early 20th century, crested china was big business, and other firms quickly followed Goss into the market, such as Shelley, a small fraction of whose designs you can see here. To appeal to consumers, manufacturers needed to find new forms to copy, which is where the Cypriot antiquities in UK museums come in. Some of Shelley's designs draw on the antiquities which Hake and Kitchener excavated for the South Kensington Museum and which formed part of their travelling collections. So, for example, a barrel jug is labelled on the base, model of vase or bottle found at Gastrica, ancient Cyprian pottery, 900 BC. The inspiration could be an object like this Cypro-archaic barrel jug excavated at Gastria by Hake and still at the Victoria and Albert Museum. The entry in the National Archives Design Register reads, "The novelty consists in the shape of the vase," emphasising that it's the unusual shape which has prompted the use of this model. You can just about see that the original prototype had engraved concentric circles on either end, imitating the painted design, though this hasn't translated to the finished product. Another design is labelled model of lampshade found at Salamis, ancient Cyprian pottery, and this closely resembles a Hellenistic lamp holder from Salamis from the Hake-Kitchener excavations, though the designer has stopped short of including the handle. As we saw earlier, the South Kensington Museum collection toured around the country, and there would have been plenty of opportunities for Shelley's designers to see them. We can also see the impact of ancient Cypriot collections in local museums. Carlton China, another firm of manufacturers, produced various designs, including one labelled Model of Phoenician Vase, original in Hanley Museum. Hanley was one of the museums to which Colin Minton Campbell had donated Cypriot antiquities. We can see that it's a version of a juglet with a high cutaway spout and string loops on the handle and on the neck. The design register shows that it was originally planned to include actual pierced string loops, though this clearly hasn't been possible in the version which ended up being produced. The design could be based on something like this juglet still in the collections of Stoke Museum in Hanley. Its spout is broken now, but the shape is broadly similar. As time went on, designers made less effort to closely copy the models on which they were drawing, and the label Cyprian vase was applied to a range of shapes with nothing at all to do with Cyprus. But these early models evidently demonstrate an engagement with the objects themselves and an attempt to reproduce them in miniature form. Moira Vincentelli has emphasised the role of these ceramic souvenirs in creating links across space and time, between the giver and the recipient, and between the place it was acquired and its final home. For these examples, we can add the link between Cyprus, the place of origin of the designs on which the manufacturers drew, and the British homes in which they were treasured. However, it's hard to know exactly what kind of impression these replicas of Cypriot antiquities would have made on those who purchased them. Some, as we've seen, included information about their models on the base and may well have sent people to the local museum to see the original pieces from which they were copied. The use of Cypriot antiquities as models suggests a pragmatic response by designers to the need to find new designs for the crowded market in crested ware, and perhaps a sense of pride in the collections of local museums and British links with Cyprus. Ultimately, however, there were probably as many different responses as there were consumers. Objects can act as portals to the past and give us different ways of accessing distant beliefs, values, and attitudes. Exploring the representation of Cyprus in British material culture offers an oblique perspective which can perhaps complement historical approaches which rely more heavily on textual sources. We can see that early manufacturers traded heavily on ideas of Cyprus as distant in geography and culture, and also rooted in the ancient Mediterranean past, which was a source of fascination to many British people, especially those with access to a classical education. Andrekos Varnava has argued persuasively that at the time of the British administration, public discourse shaped Cyprus as an El Dorado, a glorious, fantastical utopia against which reality would always fall short. And I wonder whether we're seeing traces of that kind of attitude in some of these early romanticised scenes. Later on, we see how Cyprus is used as a catchphrase to attract the consumer's attention and applied to a huge variety of products, more or less regardless of their form and decoration. However, we also see signs of a more thoughtful engagement with the material presence of ancient Cyprus in UK museums, drawn on by designers to develop new wares at either end of the market. Museum objects are sometimes framed as cultural ambassadors, which is a rather loaded term given their often contested collection histories. However, the evidence suggests that for at least some attentive museum visitors, they offered a glimpse of previously unknown cultures and artistic styles and sparked creative conversations. These responses form part of the reception and legacy of Cypriot antiquities in the UK and part of the rich benefits they offer to visitors to the museums in which they currently reside. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wonderful lecture.
Thank you
very much. Questions? Any questions?
I'd like to know whether Cyprus was singled out. I'd like to know if Cyprus was singled out as a colony, let's say, with inspiring the British ceramics industry. Did other colonies get similar exposure like this? Because obviously Cyprus seems to be quite a good name to set.
Yes.
So I wonder if Kenya, for example, would have had something similar.
That's a really interesting question, and I wish I had the knowledge to give you a fuller answer. I think I now need to go and look at, all the other colonies. I haven't noticed a similar kind of material response, but then I haven't specifically gone to look for it. I think in the earlier period, we see these romantic, these exotic, orientalized images which are termed Cyprus, and they a whole range of other countries are also used as pattern names. So I think that's a more kind of generic approach. But after 1878, something changes, and just the sheer quantity of products labelled as Cyprus is just absolutely striking. So I think there's something quite particular happening there, and it's the next question really. Why? You know, as I mentioned very briefly, it's kind of, I think it would be really interesting to look, you know, not just at ceramics, but across a whole range of different areas of manufacture to find out kind of how these brand names, Cyprus as a brand name, was being used, and how, whether some manufacturers in particular picked up on it, but you find it everywhere. You look through a newspaper of that time, and it's just, you know, as we saw in the adverts, it's Cyprus, 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 and yeah, really quite striking.
Lindy.
Thank you, Anna. That's so interesting and so much more diverse and widespread than I had any idea of all this material. And I really, the women potters, decorators are amazing. I was wondering, did any of these people have control over form and decoration, or one or the other they did?
Yes, I mean the Dalton in itself is just, you know, just a really interesting place to look at, the Dalton Lambeth studio, because it really was, Henry Dalton is a bit of a hero of mine, because he really wanted to just set his workers free to follow their tastes and follow their skills. And so Hannah Barlow, who's the sister of Florence Barlow, was really good at drawing animals, so he said, just do animals. That's all you need to do. And it was just, yeah. So, but as I understand it, the painters would talk to the potters, who were usually male, actually, as I understand it, usually, you know, the ones throwing the pots, and they'd give them an idea of what they wanted. So I don't think they actually tended to throw the pots themselves, but there would be a conversation. So very possibly there was a bit of kind of artistic input going in there as well, you know, a two-way conversation about what would work or how closely you could follow the original model. I mean, all of the kind of the ancient Cypriot ceramics I used as comparators. I used ones from the Metropolitan Museum because their image permissions are very generous, but they can all be found in the collections of the British Museum and the South Kensington Museum. So it seems likely that the Dalton artists would go along to the museum with their sketchbook, walk around, see what they found interesting, and you know, then go back to the studio and work something up based on that. So, yeah.
Any other questions? Please.
Oh, nothing, Anita, thank you. Okay. Well, thank you so much. That was super, super interesting, whole lecture.
Thank you.
I find it very interesting, fascinating, if you can expand a little more. We tend to have the idea that we have this kind of high culture that comes from archaeology and is there in museums such as the British Museum, which then gives inspiration or gives continuity to the material culture, the kitchen, the souvenir, but you somehow hinted that it could be the other way around. This fascination of the Orient that gave birth to this material culture that was consumables actually might have encouraged the archaeological excavations to take place and therefore find a way back in the museum. So it's very interesting, this reading of this material culture, vice versa. Like I think this is what you were hinting or suggesting.
Thank you. Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I mean, I think it's hard to unpick kind of cause and effect and kind of quite how the circular effects work. I think placing Cypriot antiquities in local museums must have had, you know, long-lasting effects that it's really hard for us to kind of find the traces of now, which is partly why I'm so fascinated by this, you know, this souvenir work, which is way down the lower end of the market, because that was an opportunity for people without, you know, the capital to collect antiquities to be part of, to make their own collection. And certainly Goss, as one of the earlier manufacturers, very much had high moral claims for what he was doing. He felt he was educating people by giving them the opportunity to take a little replica of, a piece of historic interest and to learn a bit about it. And in fact, you find articles written by school teachers, rural school teachers, who say, well, you might not have access to a museum in your school, but look at the ancient Roman replicas produced by Mr. Goss and use those for teaching. So, that's kind of an interesting take on it. But I think, I'm not sure I'd argue that ceramic manufacture had a kind of direct impact on archaeological excavation, or that any of the designers kind of went to seek out such things, certainly in Cyprus, as a result of, wanting to develop their artistic repertoire. But certainly museums, as kind of a compendium of different forms, different shapes, different decorations, a very, very kind of mid to late 19th century idea in Britain. And it's fascinating to me that we can see just some traces of how, because we hear a lot about what people intended, people like Minton Campbell and the South Kensington Museum, and what they wanted to do with their, lofty aspirations of sending out this stuff. But to kind of get a bit at what people actually did with it is, interesting to me to kind of find out what the response was. It's very hard to know for sure, but there are hints and clues.
Isn't ceramics basically a canvas which can be filled with any imaginary things, and just grabbing some parts of the past, combining them with the modern, and distributing in the mass production of ceramics some kind of images, fantasies to everyone, which was like printing a canvas and just like postering images to deliver to everybody. Isn't that the whole idea of ceramics somehow?
Yeah, that's really, really nicely put, and it can be, I think. I mean, I find it interesting that quite a lot of this is tableware.
Yes.
So, it's useful things that people would have, if you think how often you see a plate, when you buy a dinner service, you're going to be living with it every single day. And this is why the role of women in making these choices is interesting to me, because they might not perhaps have access to, the education and perhaps the resources, the libraries, the gentlemen's clubs and so on, where they might be able to see, books of etchings such as Luigi Mayer's, but they might be able to have, tableware, which at least gave them a kind of a feel of being associated with the, a romantic, distant, learned, the semantic kind of web of all the associations of these images is quite complicated, and it's hard to know exactly what would have appealed to individuals. But yes, one of the brilliant things about, ceramics of these kind is that they are so multiple. They are, so widely available, which is, why we can still find them very easily kind of on eBay, wherever else today, because ceramic survives. That's another wonderful thing about it. It's very easily broken, but if not broken, it just goes on and on and on and on and on. So, yeah, interesting.
Any other questions? Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
I hope you join us for a drink in the foyer, where you can have even private chats with our speaker. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Reeve, it was brilliant. beautiful.
Thank
We
you.
learned a lot.
Very much appreciated.
So, let us stay in touch.
Yes, I will.